Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, host and head bookologist here at the Get Literate podcast. I'm a book loving, notebook hoarding reader and writer on a mission to change lives one book and one notebook at a time. On this podcast, we explore the power of bookology. What's that? That's the study of books and reading and notebooks and writing mixed with mindful practices and creativity to create lives we love. Here, you'll find episodes exploring the reading and writing life and how they can make our actual lives better. You'll get book recommendations and notebooking prompts around particular themes, and you'll even hear from authors and special guests who can fuel our reading and writing hearts and help us take inspired action in our own daily practices. So, grab a notebook and your TBR list, and let's get literate. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Get Literate podcast. I'm Stephanie Affinito, and as always, I'm back with another episode on how reading and writing can make life better. But I'm here today with a special treat. I have a special guest that is here to help us deepen our understanding of bibliotherapy, using books to heal, and to help us take a deeper dive into literary journaling. Something I've been working on ever since today's guest came back to the podcast in episode 103. Bijal Shah of Bookotherapy is here to help us harness the power of reading and writing to make life better. And it's the perfect time because we're heading into the spring season of growth and renewal. And what better time than to take a look at our reading life through that lens too. Bijal, welcome to the podcast. I am so excited to have you back and talk all things bibliotherapy, books and reading and writing and all of the things.
Hi, Stephanie. It's so nice to be back on this podcast talking about something so close to my heart, bibliotherapy, and the use of, literature, reading, writing, as you mentioned. I feel like your podcast is like the perfect home for it. Um,
I agree.
so thank you so much for having me, and I'm really excited to have, our almost like a sequel to our previous conversation. I can't believe
Yes.
it's episode 103. But yeah, really excited to share more and even recap a bit as well so that new listeners can also catch up on some of the exciting things that we have spoken about in the past.
Yeah, I think it really is perfect timing. I mentioned, I think taking a look at our reading lives and the power of reading and writing is perfect for any kind of season, but especially a season change as we're heading into spring. People are thinking renewal and growth and, coming out of our shells of our home, getting out there and rethinking what our days look like. But the last time we met, as I mentioned, listeners, if you haven't listened to it, it was episode 103, and we talked all things bibliotherapy. And we were celebrating the launch of your book. Like you literally wrote the book on bibliotherapy called Bibliotherapy, The Healing Power of Reading. And in that episode, we were celebrating the launch over in the UK. And the timing's perfect because this month in the US, your book is finally releasing to US readers, although I went overseas and got my copy the second that I could. So it is definitely perfect timing to be back and talk about all of your work and what you've been up to.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. I know when you contacted me, I really felt like the stars had aligned because the book literally is coming out on the 29th of April or something in the US. And yeah, and so it's nice. Although I know a lot of people have been able to get the book in the UK through Blackwell's, where you get free shipping. But the book is actually out in Kindle version in the US already. So I think at the moment it's only $1. So if you want to download it, it's great.
Crazy.
But
Listeners,
if you want
just
the
press
hardback,
pause. Yeah, listeners need to press pause right now and then go buy it and then come back because that's crazy. And who knows when that will go away.
yeah, no, exactly. I never know what my publisher's doing, so they're always chopping and changing things. Totally out of my control. But the hardback is out on April 29th, so I do hope that lots of people get a chance to get a copy of it because I feel like it's a really comprehensive text on bibliotherapy, and it's not just a self-help book; it's also part memoir. part literary reading lists, part a history of therapeutic reading, sort of all combined. And of course, curating your own literature or own reading lists, which we'll talk about in this episode as well. So I really hope that it's just going to be really helpful for people who do get a chance to read it.
And it fits perfectly in your hand. It's a little bit smaller than, let's say, a typical hardback fiction novel that might be released. And it's like it fits right into your purse. You can tuck the sticky notes, a little pocket of them in there. You can see all of my sticky notes. Listeners can't. But listeners know me, so they can imagine just how
Yeah.
many sticky notes I have. It really is just the perfect book that you could add to your bag or your stack, and is so approachable. You do have a lot of information on the history and what it is and why it matters, but it's in your voice, as you mentioned. It's part memoir, it's part reviewing other kind of clients that you've had and how books have helped them. And so it just feels like you're kind of pouring a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, getting your favorite books and chatting with someone who loves them as
Yeah.
much as you do.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
it
No,
feels like.
I really wanted to make it accessible, to readers. And I didn't want it to be like an academic book that's just dry. And because that's not what it was. It was really trying to shift people's perspective on reading and the hidden potential of it through writing as well, and leveraging your reading, and the case for it through the history, and the case for it through the stories that I share through my bibliotherapy room, if I may call it that. But it's and then also the power of like really reading something that's totally selfishly just for you, that you can be obsessed with. Not that you're probably not already obsessed with reading if you're a book lover, but it's something that would be so therapeutic and healing for you in that moment. Not everybody wants to see a therapist, and if books can have that impact on you, then why not? And let's learn how we can do that ourselves at home.
Yes.
And so that was very much the tone of the last section, with curating your own reading lists and the A to Z of reading lists at the back for different mental health themes, right? From anxiety and depression and all of that. That was the goal of just being able to do that yourself, especially if you're, on attachment theory, if you're anxiously avoidant, or just have that avoidant attachment personality. I think bibliotherapy works extremely well for them, or more introverted. But it's for everyone. It's for everyone. So,
It's
um,
so funny that you just mentioned the attachments because my daughter made me take a quiz this past week, some quiz online about your attachment theory, and you've said what mine was, and I was like, what are these? And
but
that
yeah,
is must be why books are so comforting to me. It's the
yeah,
introvert and the skeptic, I guess, in me.
yeah, yeah. I know exactly, and you know, I mean, books really have those effects on the neural pathways, without us realizing, the dopamine pathways, the just art on your brain. And I'll talk about one of the books that I'm reading at the moment. But it's a I honestly believe in the necessity of creativity in the healing process. We all need it. We all need creativity to heal. And that's why sometimes I feel like traditional therapy kind of doesn't always give us that, whereas bibliotherapy does.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that, we can kind of people can just leverage off that a little bit, in their own healing processes.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on when you said it's this hidden potential, right? It's
Yeah,
for
yeah,
so many, maybe not those listening to the podcast because they're here for a reason, but for so many, books and reading and writing or journaling or creativity is something that you do when you have time, if you have time, if you get your work done. It may be considered, as you mentioned, something that's selfish and, I have to do my other things first, when in fact, it is an under discussed tool for wellness. It is a often a very cheap form of wellness that can really
yes,
support you in so many ways. And that's why I just so admire your work, because you are trying to shout from the rooftops. You are shouting from the rooftops. Like, this is available to all of us. and can
Yes.
be a tool for healing that starts with you in your living room and puts the
Yes,
control literally
100%.
in the palm
Yeah.
of your hand.
Yes, 100%. I think what books do is they just give you such an agency, which, sometimes in traditional therapy, we might be giving away a little bit, because really you're in control of what you read, of your reading life, of how you want to make sense of the stories that are resonating with you, of how you want to make sense of the emotional triggers that are kind of hitting you when you're reading a story. And, I'm not, I mean, I do obviously in my bibliotherapy sessions act as a counselor and as a conduit for emotional processing. So I don't want to belittle like anything. There is definitely it's so much value in that because sometimes you need somebody else helping you and prompting you along. But books also prompt you and they don't judge, whereas we may sometimes feel like the therapist is judging us or there's, some judgment and our defense is a little bit higher. I think with literature, we can often feel safer a lot quicker and more often,
Yes.
which I find that, which is one of the reasons why I do heavily promote like the writing techniques alongside the reading, um, as a complementary approach to as an alternative to traditional therapy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's go there. Let's just go right to that because in the last episode, we really went in deep into what bibliotherapy is and how it works. And listeners can go back and listen, and we can certainly recap some of that here. But what we also talked about in that episode, which was newer for me, was your idea of literary reflective practice, whether
Yes.
someone calls it reading response or book journaling or whatever term. It's adding writing to your reading practice as a way to think and reflect and just put it out on the page to examine. And while I've always been a writer, a journaler, a dear diaryer,
Yeah.
whatever term it is, I've always leaned towards writing. I love my morning page practice with
Love
Julia
that.
Cameron. It
Yeah.
wasn't until that episode with you that I realized I could more explicitly connect my reading to my writing or my writing to my reading. And when I started to using some of the ideas that you present in the book, it's a game changer. It was a game changer for me. And now I can't really talk about my reading life without my writing life sneaking in, and I can't talk about my writing without my reading life sneaking in. And I think it's been a
So wonderful.
beautiful connection that I
Yeah.
wouldn't have entertained um, unless we had that conversation, unless I had your book. So I would love to just pass the mic right over to you and say, tell us what this is and why it's important for someone to consider doing this kind of reflective practice.
Yeah, sure. So, reflective practice, just to distinguish it from my foundational technique, which is literary journaling. Uh, firstly, literary journaling is just a stream of consciousness approach to your reading, writing down what's triggering you perhaps, or something that you've really resonated with as well. Like in the story, that's often giving clues to things that need to be addressed in our inner psyche. Um, but just, when we're journaling, it's more stream of consciousness. We're just writing down what's coming, no judgment, no censoring, just write, and I often encourage that. And it's a great way to uncover some of the themes that might be coming up for you, or uncovering the unconscious a little bit, or even providing some self-awareness. And it's a great tool. And often that's what I start with. But then as we go further in our bibliotherapy journey together, say if you're working with me in bibliotherapy sessions, then the following few sessions, I might say, okay, let's do some reflective practice now, which is a much more goal-orientated practice. You're journaling with a goal in mind. Say that you want to reduce your anxiety or your feelings of sadness, or you want to process some of the pain that sadness or grief bring, or you want to be able to manage your anger and perhaps adopt some coping strategies or ways of dealing with it. Then that's when we, start bringing in reflective practice and focus on, writing with a goal in mind and really working towards uncovering and processing those specific emotions. Um, or if it's not emotions, just some of the needs that you might be, facing and how to meet those needs. Um, So, or something that you want to develop in, a space that you want to develop in. You might want to just gain more self-awareness of something, or you might want to figure out how to manage or navigate a certain relationship that's difficult. So all of those things with the reflective practice can be, you know, more focused. And I think I have a whole guide in my book on reflective practice as well, with some exercises that you might want to try if you're looking for some prompts or some helpful techniques to get to do it. But essentially, that's the difference between literary journaling and reflective practice. It really is reflecting on what you're reading with a goal in mind. And I often, we they use it a lot in the medical world. So you'll have nurses and doctors who often use reflective practice in their own training and education. But I really wanted to bring this approach to um bibliotherapy, because I feel like it's a great tool. Um, and for those people who are more goal orientated or who like to work towards something, and not just be journaling for the sake of it, might find that a more useful approach to adopt. So yes, and that's just one of the many techniques in the toolbox when it comes to using writing, alongside your reading. Um, and not everyone's going to resonate with every technique. So I'm hoping that there's something for everyone in the umbrella of techniques that I've suggested, but I do like to get everyone to do a bit of foundational literary journaling,
Mhm.
and even doing a basic audit of all the books that have shaped you to date, um, because there's so much power in there, and I think there's so much you uncover about yourself. It really is like a self-discovery exercise. Which is why, and I talk about my own audit. I share it in the book, like literally all the books that have shaped me and influenced me, and um which have been so crucial in my journey to date. So yeah.
I'm glad you made the distinction between the literary journaling and the more goal-oriented reflective practice, because you're right. Some people gravitate towards one or the other. And for me, I started with the literary journaling. And
Yes.
at first that looked like for me just pulling out quotes that spoke to me. I'm definitely a quote collector. And
Yeah.
so as you mentioned in the book,
Mine too.
highlight, to journal and reflect, I would start to pull out those quotes, but then I would do a little bit of writing on why I thought that quote jumped out at me, why it was resonating for me, what message perhaps did I need to learn. And from just lifting lines from the text and writing about it, then I became more of a stream of conscious writer.
Yeah.
What did this book need me to know today? And I would just write
Yeah.
about, okay, what did I like? And especially as you mentioned, what didn't I like? What triggered me? What did I feel
What
like?
irritated you? What were you
Yeah.
disgusted by?
And I
Yeah,
I was
precisely
shocked.
even. Yeah.
Yeah, it was so helpful to not just experience it as I read and move on, but to actually ask those questions of why. Some pretty important learning came out of just that stream of consciousness writing, and then I was hooked and moved to your more structured approaches, and have been just going down the rabbit hole of all of the different ways to do that. So if listeners are listening and are thinking, I don't write about my reading. Like that's what I did in
Yeah.
school. It's not that kind of writing. It truly is
No,
this
it's
personal,
more personal.
reflective, and as you
Yeah.
mentioned, whatever feels good to you, right? I started just writing quotes down, and that led to a deeper, longer, more expansive practice that I feel like has been so impactful.
Yes. Yeah, no, exactly. I think the first question I get everyone to focus on is, when we often, choose a book that we really connect with. And so I'd say, what's your reason for picking up this book? What have you
Mhm.
connected with? What exactly is it that what need is this book meeting? Because obviously it's meeting a need. And I think that helps to uncover so much and unravel so much, in terms of your needs and just some of the things on your mind at the moment. But secondly, the second question, which is on the opposite side of that, is what's irritating me or triggering me about this book? Because again, that is uncovering so much. And sometimes you don't want to pick up a book because we just don't connect with it, and that's fine. Or it could also be because it's touching on something that's quite difficult, that might actually be quite helpful to address, you know, something traumatic, or and you might not feel ready, and that's fine. But if you do feel ready, again, do those journaling prompts, do the exercise. I have a like a little ebook that
I was
kind
just
of
gonna mention it. Yes, talk about that. It may be a little ebook, but there's power in that ebook. So yes, please talk about that.
Yeah, sure. Well, to be honest, if you get the book, all the prompts are in there
Yeah.
actually. But there's a few more in this short ebook, because it's 365 days. It's a prompt for every day, really. But there are prompts in the book as well. So depending on, what you'd rather have, there'll be some sort of guidelines to help you. Just sometimes we get stuck in terms of what questions should I be asking when I'm doing this journaling. So
Yes.
these are some prompts to help, because I think prompts are really, really helpful. Um, Especially when you don't have a counselor or therapist there, to perhaps guide you.
Right.
So yeah.
So do you recommend for someone listening who's never tried this before, but who is hearing us talk about it and how inviting it is and how powerful it is, how do you recommend someone brand new to it begin?
Yeah, so I mean I would first of all get you to perhaps curate a reading list. So I mean I curate reading lists called book prescriptions for therapeutic or personal interest. But in my book I talk about how you can do your own one, so you don't necessarily need to come to me or another bibliotherapist or yourself. But you can curate your own one, by asking some basic questions like, what are you looking to currently address? What's on your mind? What's are you finding really difficult? And then sort of focus on those themes. And then, of course, tailor it to your genre preferences. So if you prefer fiction or nonfiction, or even within that, if you prefer memoir or novel or crime or whatever it is, try and find, um, really hone in on what your preferences are, and then obviously research books in that space that address both of those themes, but also how much time you have to read. If you don't have a lot of time, I'd say go for short stories or essays or even poetry. If you have a bit more time, dive into something a bit deeper. Also, the mediums you prefer. Do you prefer paperback, Kindle, audio? Because that makes a difference in whether you're going to be committed to finishing the book, how engaged you're going to be. Like, I listen to a lot of audio. I find audio works really well for me. I love the emotional connection that I can have with a good narrator. But of course, some people prefer Kindle because it's convenient. Some people prefer paperback or hardback because of the touch. Touch is a big part of reading. There's a connection, a special connection that we feel. So, that's totally understandable. And so, the book has to be available in those mediums as well. So it's all those things like, we're trying to work out something that's going to allow you to commit to the book, actually practically allow you to do the reading. And then of course the connection and identification part is really important. It's really the first stage of bibliotherapy, because you have to be able to connect with a book or an author or writing style to in order to engage with it or identify with the story. And then of course, we want you to read and do some writing around it, some journaling to kind of unpack what's going on for you, why you're resonating with it, what's standing out for you. And we want you to get to a place of catharsis, which is essentially relieving an emotion that you've been unable to do elsewhere. But through the literary reading and writing, it's been more flawless, and you have been able to connect with your sadness and write it down and process it. It's a wonderful way, to deal with traumatic incidents, because, um, our imagination, it's very hard for people who've experienced trauma to always access their imagination, because there's so many blocks. But then with the reading and writing, that's really helping you process it a bit more and practice that skill a bit more. You know, Accessing our imagination is really a skill. So, all of those things are really helpful and getting there and processing that difficult memory. And yeah, so essentially, because then eventually what we want to get to is feeling relieved of an emotion, feeling like you've gained some self-awareness, feeling that you've gained some insights, or even a coping strategy to help you feel to move forward. So, it's with all of those things in mind that we are curating this reading list. And the questions that I suggested right now, eh, reflecting your preferences, essentially that's a questionnaire for me that I have when I'm curating book prescriptions for clients, to help me perfect that reading list for that client. And it's very personalized, it's very tailored. It's really important to me. It doesn't matter how long that prescription is going to take. For me, it's more that it's really tailored to my client's needs. And I'd say to yourself, like, give yourself that same time and space if when you're curating it for yourself, because you want it to be um, really true to your needs. So,
And as
yeah,
someone who's been on the receiving end of one of
yeah,
your book prescriptions, I can attest to how powerful they really are. I was so floored by how well you figured out what I might need next based on a questionnaire, not talking to you in person, but based on a questionnaire. You came back with books that were all new to me, which I loved. There weren't any books that I had already read, and they were a mix of genres based on the genres that I said I loved. And every book that I read off of the list really was just so spot on.
oh,
So
that's
you
so
do
good.
have
Oh,
a
that's
magic,
amazing.
you have a magic power when it comes to choosing those books. And so I'm so glad that you focused on this here, because it's such a gift when you feel like someone took the time to listen to you and what you say you want and what you like, and then delivered something based on exactly what you said. That's just like the first level of feeling heard, especially if you're seeking bibliotherapy, which I think many of us are, to go through something hard. Having you just acknowledge, this is what you said, this is what you want, and here, this is what I think. That right there is the first gift. And then the second gift is what happens when you actually read the books and do the writing. So, so glad that you put those book services out into the world. So powerful.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm just so happy that it's resonated with you in that way. So really, really appreciate the feedback. But I'm really hoping that I can continue to do that for clients, um and people find it valuable, because that's the goal. That's my work. That's my mission with bibliotherapy. So
Yeah. I'd love to pick your brain about a way that I've been using writing in relation to my reading, but it's almost in reverse. And as I say that out loud, I realize it's not really in reverse. But what I've been finding really helpful as my own practice of writing about my reading grows and evolves lately in this particular season, where there's a lot going on in my life, I have found that starting with the page has been so important in helping me curate that book list. So I will like literally dump everything out that is on my mind and on my heart and is going well and isn't going well. And in that
yeah,
process of writing everything, I feel like the themes and the things I need to then choose books appear on the page. And then I read and then I write about them. And it tends to be this beautiful spiral of when I'm reflecting in that one book, it usually leads me to a little clue of perhaps the next book that I might
yes,
use. And I feel like, we're writing our own prescriptions over
yes.
time.
Yes, we are, exactly. And like, each book is really, each new book that you think of is really, a sequel to the other book, but in your own
Yes.
kind of on your own kind of journey, helping you on your own sort of bibliotherapy journey, I'd say, helping you get to, where you need to be, or where you want to go. And it's beautiful, it's so unique and individual for each person.
Yeah.
Um, but
Yes.
it's fascinating, and it's and also just fascinating, the secret lives of of our books that, sometimes people might not understand why we're reading something, but it's so dear to us and so valuable and special to us. It's really cool. Thank you for sharing that. I hadn't even really picked up on it, but yeah.
Oh, good. I'm glad I
Yeah.
could highlight that for you. So speaking of books, right? We're talking about writing in relation to them and perhaps writing as leading you to the next book that you might need. You read a
Yeah.
lot of books. I know you read a lot of books because you recommend a lot of books, but what kind of books does a bibliotherapist read for herself? I'm wondering some books that you're reading.
Oh gosh, yes. Look, I try to read across a range of genres because, I do that for a living and I like to recommend. So, but one of the books that really stood out for me this last week was when I was at a friend's house, and I love, peering into other people's bookshelves and see what they're reading.
The best.
And there was one that was called My Life as a Russian Novel, and I thought, oh, that sounds interesting because not that it kind of fell under bibliotherapy a little bit, but it was nice to see how people imagination works with their sort of reading lives, and obviously this guy, the author's Emmanuel Carrera, and he writes very different types of books. So this again was a really different kind of book to the one he'd written before. I think his publisher must be like really still trying to figure him out. But anyway, and it's really about him trying to make a documentary in his native Russia because his mother was a Russian historian. But I think he weaves into the book so many themes of other Russian novels that probably resonated with him whilst he was trying to make this documentary. And his grandmother, from I think the mom's side, was a Nazi collaborator and how she was treated. And yeah, it's just really insightful. So it's kind of like an auto-fiction book. So it's part memoir, but some of it's fictionalized. And yeah, it's just a really wonderful, wonderful read, especially if you like Russian literature, because it brings in some of the other authors and some of the tropes, I guess. Um, yeah, so it's a nice read, and it's not something that's current. It's just something that you can
Yeah.
pick out from one of these many beautiful novels that are lost in the sea of novels that come out. Yeah. But yeah, so like from a fiction perspective, I'm reading that, and then nonfiction, I'm reading Your Brain on Art by Susan Maximin, and
I
I don't.
love that book.
Yeah,
Yes.
fascinating. Like I only came across it this month at a bookstore that I was at, and I was like, "Oh wow, this is so similar to my work." And I know I didn't want to give you bibliotherapy books, but for me, whenever I see things like that, I'm just hooked because
Yes.
I want to know how we can continue to use literature and art in a positive way for the brain. And again, she talks a lot about the creative power of art to heal us, and literally the impact it has on our brain when we're reading, and what art does to it. And I just thought, right, this is right up my street. So I've been highlighting a lot of quotes and things from it, and sometimes so many passages. I'm probably going over the 10% limit of what you're allowed to quote and clip on Amazon Kindle. But yeah, brilliant, brilliant, brilliant read. Lots of personal stories. And it's not just reading, but not just art, but it's everything like dance, drama, the artistic experience. Um, and it's interesting actually because when I was writing my book, I came across this ancient Indian philosophy called rasa theory. Um, which is all about the different rasas that we experience. And rasa means taste in Sanskrit and Hindi, but essentially, it's what emotions the arts evoke for us. And there's like the primary emotions like sadness, anger, compassion, wonder, disgust, a few more, humor. And there's 8 of these rasas. And ancient Indian art was always written with one of those themes that it's trying to evoke in its reader. And it's fascinating because being Indian, I'd never come across it. And when I was researching the book, that's obviously I couldn't put that in the book because it was far too late. But I do have an online course now on Indian Rasa theory and bibliotherapy, and It's how we can use some of the different Indian literature that's out there to evoke these emotions in us so that we can process them. Um, and it's not so dissimilar to the ancient Greeks, who used, and even Shakespeare, who used either tragedy to relieve sadness or comedy, as well, to work on those on sadness a lot. So yeah, it's interesting how uh how these I think the ancient Greeks and the ancient Indian philosophy was around the same time as well. So it's interesting that there is these concepts of art and emotion. But Rasa theory specifically deals with all kinds of arts, but there's a specifically subset for literature in the ancient Indian literature and art. So yeah, fascinating.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned something when you were first talking about your fiction book that
Yeah.
wasn't necessarily, I think you said it wasn't necessarily a bibliotherapy book. And I want to ask you about this because I kind of I go through this question a lot. I get it from a lot of people who work with me. So in my world, I call it more of restorative reading because I'm not a therapist and I stay in my lane of just loving books and wanting to match them with people. And I found that I love curating my own stack of list or my stack of books for my own bibliotherapy, as you mentioned. But then there are other times where I'm just picking up a book because, like, Reese Witherspoon told me to, or it jumped out at me at the library. And I don't think it's necessarily one that I've chosen, for quote bibliotherapy. And then it surprises me. And there's something in there that I
Yeah.
was supposed to learn. So I may not
Yeah.
have thought that Russian spy book was
Yeah.
a book that was going to be healing in some way, but there
Yeah.
it is. There's the nugget. Do you find that yes, it's important to curate books, but sometimes those books that just catch your attention maybe are doing so for a reason? I
Yes,
wonder what
no,
you think
yes.
about
I
that.
think I think I think the I think that book definitely resonated with me because I often like to um I often like to explore, my fantasy world alongside my reading and reading other people's written stories because I feel like there's so much in fantasy that can be healing as well.
Yeah.
Um, and my life as a Russian novel was so like interesting because he was obviously going through other people's stories to really make sense of his own experience in Russia. Um, and I just thought, yeah, that's me trying to do all these things, to make sense of my own life experiences. But also, I think just the fact that he is writing a different story to the ones that he usually writes, brought out the artist in me because I love to write, and whilst I like writing about bibliotherapy, there's so many parts of me that would love to write a novel, to probably talk about a fantasy that I have,
Yeah.
that I want to create for others, recreate for others. So, it resonated with me on so many different levels. I
Yes.
have to read it. Yeah.
Oh, you need to do that writing.
Yeah, I know. I know. Oh my goodness. Yes, I would love to write a novel next, although my publishers would be like, "What?"
What is she doing?
Maybe one more book on bibliotherapy. I do have more material that I'd love to share with everyone. So maybe one more of that and then maybe the novel.
Yes. Yeah. I love that example though, because, you know, bibliotherapy with the books that we curate for ourselves is important, but I feel like it's also just a stance you take around reading that we are open to hearing whatever messages are inside those books and then
Yeah.
using them to help ourselves heal in whatever way it is. And so those can be intentionally curated or just ones that you're open to exploring. And I love how it may not even have been the content of the book that sparked you, but just knowing about the author and going out of his typical comfort zone was a spark for you. Like you've just given me a whole nother layer of bibliotherapy to think about is
Yeah.
the author and the genre and the choices they make. beyond what's on the page. Like that could be a whole chapter for you, Bijal.
Yeah, no, and the author is so important because it's our connection with the author, right? Especially when it's like memoir, because it's
Yes,
like their story. Um, but it's, even although the author is writing for novels, even though the author is writing through a character, it's so much is about themselves and their lens, right? And the lens that they're writing through, and the characters really being shaped by the author's
right.
experiences and influences of life and their fantastical thinking and imagination. So there is that connection with the author that we feel even through the character. That's so special and so inspiring. So
Yeah.
it's really an important part of bibliotherapy,
Yeah.
the connection we feel with the author, um,
I'm
beyond the
going to be
story.
thinking about that all day now of because that now that I'm thinking about it, it has happened so many times of having
Yeah.
a connection, yes, to the book, but then the author or the information or whatever it is around the book can be just as important.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like the back matter of books, right? You connect with the story and then you have that good back matter. Like there's a whole nother layer that we could dive into. Oh my gosh, we could keep talking for like another hour, but we
So
can't.
much.
So I would love to end by having you share what could you help readers with? Where can they find you? You mentioned just one of the courses that you have. You have more for people interested in bibliotherapy, group bibliotherapy, children's bibliotherapy. They can get
Yes.
their own prescription. I'd love for you to just share where they can find you and what they might expect so that they can connect with you on a deeper level.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, no. So if you are interested in bibliotherapy or a book prescription or doing one of the courses or a bibliotherapy session with me on my website, booktherapy.io, so www.booktherapy.io is where all of these are housed. But I'm on all the social media channels, Instagram by far the most active, LinkedIn as well. Um, I do have a Substack as well, so if you wanna, you can always sign up to that. I do these little voice notes from me, and then I put the transcripts onto Substack, so that if people don't have time to listen, they can still read the transcripts. And I'm always trying to share more on bibliotherapy and resources and power of storytelling and all of those things, all of those wonderful things, similar to your work, Stephanie. So people can also find me on there and always reach out because I love hearing from people who have an interest in the space. It's part of my mission to promote bibliotherapy and continue to pioneer it internationally as well. And the book's out in many different languages now. So if English is not your first language, it is out in Portuguese and Chinese and Romanian and Bulgarian and Turkish and Slovenian and Hungarian and a few more. So I do, oh, and of course the English language one. But yes, I'm hoping that lots of readers can access the material for sure. Yeah.
Well, and as we mentioned at the top of the episode, but that hardback will now be available much easier in the US towards the end of April. So I'll make sure to put a link to the book in the show notes along with all of the places they can contact you. And I'm going to put a link directly to that book prescription and your Substack because those are both two things that I love. I love seeing those pop into my email inbox. So I'll make sure to share them there. And I'm just so grateful to have a chance to talk to you again. I so admire your work, and I feel like we could talk for a really long time on these topics. And I just thank you for coming back, and thank you for all you're doing to share your message of the power of books and reading and yes, writing too, for all of us to heal and just feel better.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you so much, Stephanie. I really appreciate you having me. And, I think we're definitely on the same page when it comes to reading and writing. So it's so nice to be having this conversation with you and hopefully future collaborations as well. So
Yes.
exciting and really exciting news about your retreats as well. So yeah, I'm, you know, we will definitely be talking again, I hope.
Yes, it's a to be continued, right? It's
Yes,
a to
to
be
be continued.
continued
Exactly. Yeah.
So, listeners, get ready. There's always a to be continued. But for now, thank you for listening to this episode of Get Literate, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Get Literate podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes and at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to join my Patreon community. There, you'll find additional inspiration for your reading and writing life, like bonus podcast episodes, book calendars, monthly book clubs, notebooking inspiration, live events, giveaways, and more. It's only $5 a month, and you get instant access to all of the previous content too. Learn more at getliterate.co. And one more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a friend. This helps the podcast grow and it builds our bookish and notebookish community too. Thanks for listening.